Welcome to Speak for Sports. My name is Sparsh, and today we are joined by one of our other team members, Dorjee. This is his first appearance on the channel, and we are both really excited to cover with you the free agency period and just reacting to some of the moves that's been happening throughout this week. So today we're going to just start off with the Eastern Conference, and Dorjee, let's just get right into it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the first team is the Atlanta Hawks. They drafted Jalen Johnson and Sharif Cooper in the draft. Both were steals. Jalen Johnson, I'm a huge fan of. It's a great point forward. Sharif Cooper averaged 20 in college last season, and he went to 48. So that's a pretty good pick by them. They got DeLon Wright from a 3-team trade involving Chris Dunn and Bruno Fernando, and also the Celtics traded Tristan Thompson, but fairly decent guard depth for them. Their biggest moves were definitely the extensions for Trae Young and John Collins. Trae Young obviously had that great playoff run. This absolutely lit up the playoffs, and he got pretty good extensions, like Supermax. And John Collins, people say that he got overpaid. Personally, I don't think he did. He's their second best player, and also he's someone who could, spread the floor for you, who's good defense, very athletic. He complements Trae Young really well, so I think this is a good signing for them. And they got Solomon Hill and Georgie Jang on some good contracts. And Lou Williams coming back. That's a great addition for them. He's a good scorer off the bench. And Tony Snell left for Portland.
Now, for the Boston Celtics, this is a team that really hasn't been making lots of big moves, more so just sort of preserving that salary cap. So just covering the draft first. So Juan Bragarin, drafted 45th overall. They also got Al Horford back, and they also got Chris Dunn from that trade as well. So they add some defense to their team. They also get Josh Richardson from the Mavs, Bruno Fernando from the trade. And they are also running it back with Enes Kanter, 1 year, $2.6 million. This is a good contract, right? Enes Kanter is one of those guys that can easily get those rebounds for you. Though he does lack a bit of that defensive identity, he could definitely be one of those guys in the paint for the Celtics. And we're seeing as Danny Ainge is now stepping down and Brad Stevens is in, we're seeing a lot of the old Celtics players start to run it back, right, with that familiar team. As a result, though, they lost Evan Fournier. He walked to the Knicks. Honestly, I felt this was good for Boston because he was asking for some big money, and I don't think that would have been good to, pay him that much and, run the offense through him. Better to just focus on building around Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Moses Brown was also lost to a trade. Kemba Walker, this was a good move by Boston to also let him go. No disrespect to Walker, but with those injuries, there's no really big security if he could really be there for all the games, right? So we're not really sure how he would be after those knee injuries, right? He has had lots of on and off nights. Tristan Thompson was also traded as well. Yeah, I don't really see him bringing too much compared to Enes Kanter. I thought Enes Kanter would have a better upside than Tristan Thompson. So I also feel like this is a good trade for Boston. And Semi Ojeleye as well, they're letting go of like an 8th or 9th man. So it's not really a big loss to the Boston Celtics.
So for the Brooklyn Nets, they certainly have a pretty solid offseason so far. In the first round, they got Cameron Thomas, who's a great shooter, and Deron Sharp, who's good for their center depth, as they also need some interior defense. They lack that during the playoffs. And yeah, just a few more second-round picks. They got Javon Carter prior to the draft from Landry Shamet. Pretty solid backup point guard. Won't be in the rotation too much, but he's also a good locker room presence. They got Blake Griffin back on a minimum. This was a pretty good signing for them, as Blake, before when he was in Detroit, he wasn't playing that well. Like, he wasn't really trying. And as soon as he got to Brooklyn, he started to be more in his role. He became more disciplined. He played better as well. His shot improved as well as three-point shooting. So they also got Bruce Brown on a pretty good contract. He was pretty solid for them last season, so that was good for them. James Johnson, just another veteran to have. And Patty Mills from the Spurs for 2 years and $12 million. This was a great signing for them as he can spread the floor really well. He's a good playmaker, and this is just a great addition for their already elite shooting. And DeAndre Bembry, um, just an all-around solid point guard or shooting guard. He's pretty versatile. Um, it was a pretty, it's pretty sad for us Raptors fans for for him getting waived. That was pretty unfortunate, but I think he'll do well in Brooklyn. He'll definitely have a chance to get a ring.
Agreed.
I'm happy for him. And Kevin Durant, he signed his extension today, 4 years, 198 million. Again, this is just good long term as it keeps their big three somewhat intact. Like Harden and Kyrie's on share, but they kept Kevin Durant for long term. That's obviously going to be good for them. And they did sign and traded as Spencer Dinwiddie, and they lost Jeff Green, which is a huge loss for them, in my opinion, as he was arguably their best player off the bench, and he even played the center at times for them last season. So, but overall, Brooklyn had a pretty solid offseason.
All right, so the Charlotte Hornets, they add a bit more to their team, and a lot of their big moves were actually made in the draft. James Bouknight, Kai Jones, JT Thor, Scotty Lewis drafted in that first and second round. They had some great shooters and defenders to their team. Mason Plumlee from the trade was also another key big that they add to their roster. Ish Smith, one of those other backup guards, 1 year, $4.5 million. Definitely one of those faster paced players. He would definitely complement Melo's offense. Kelly Oubre Jr., this was also a pretty good signing for the Charlotte Hornets, right? He's one of those streaky shooters from the three. And as a result of this, though, they lost Devontae Graham through the sign and trade, and then Cody Zeller and Malik Monk walked. And Malik Monk, of course, went to the Lakers, which we'll cover in a later video.
For the Chicago Bulls, they definitely are one of the winners of free agency. But we'll start with the draft first. They got Ayo Dosunmu, 38th overall, which I believe was a really underrated pick, as he was projected to be around the late first round in those mock drafts, and he has a pretty good skill set for someone who was overseas. He was definitely an interesting prospect, and they got Lonzo Ball, obviously, as one of the biggest moves of the offseason for a signing trade, and they traded Thomas Satoransky, Gary Temple to the Pelicans. Pretty decent role players, but to get Lonzo Ball for that, that's pretty solid for them. And they also got Alex Caruso to back him up. Very good defensive guard, and his three-point shooting is also solid. That's definitely a big loss for the Lakers. And then they got DeMar DeRozan, the Spurs, 3 year, $85 million, as they traded Thaddeus Young. I believe DeMar will help their offense flow more, as last season, the past few seasons, Zach LaVine has been primarily that number one guy. He's been doing a lot of the ISO ball, but with DeMar now, he has more options, and DeMar can, he obviously ISO. He's a good shot creator, so definitely help them out. And Tony Bradley and Javonte Green, just some minor deals, but they're pretty decent role players. And Daniel Tice was traded to Houston.
The Cleveland Cavaliers, they don't really make much moves this offseason. Of course, this is understandable because they seem to have a young core sort of established, especially with Evan Mobley, drafted 3rd overall. They definitely added great big to their lineup. This guy definitely has one of the potentials to be the next generational player. We'll see about that later in the future, but he's definitely one of those more mobile 7-foot centers that can definitely be a great player, especially on the fast break. He can definitely complement Sexton and Garland's offense. And they also got Ricky Rubio through a trade as well. He's a really great veteran point guard to have. He'll be a great mentor to Sexton and Garland. And Jared Allen was obviously the biggest move of their offseason. 5 years, $100 million extension. So now they have that twin tower tandem with Evan Mobley. And this is great because now they add a lot of defensive identity to their team. And this also gives assurance to them and some security for some long-term building that the Cavaliers need. And of course, they lost Taurean Prince in this process. But again, considering where they are going now with this rebuild, to add these young guys and to add Ricky Rubio as a mentor to their team, this is definitely the right move for Cleveland to make.
For the Detroit Pistons, they had a fairly decent season. Obviously, getting Cade Cunningham, the #1 overall pick, he'll definitely be their franchise player, and hopefully he'll turn out to be a stud. Isaiah Livers and Luka Garza are pretty solid picks in the second round, as well as Balsa Koprivica. In the later round, was pretty decent overseas actually. As for the free agent signings, Kelly Olynyk for 3 year, $37 million. That's a pretty decent deal for him. He's a decent floor spacer. They gave him more depth at the forward spot, or even as a center. And Corey Joseph for 2 year, $10 million. He was initially waived by them, but then re-signed to this contract, which is pretty odd. But Trey Lyles got signed from the San Antonio Spurs. Pretty decent contract for him, especially for he's a pretty good shooter. Saban Lee for 3 years. Not too bad. The price is currently undetermined, but it's overall a fairly decent offseason for Detroit. Wayne Ellington walked to the Lakers. That was a pretty kind of a big loss. He's one of the best shooters in the league, and they waived 2 players and they traded Mason Plumlee to Charlotte.
The Indiana Pacers, they also make a lot of quiet moves in this offseason. Their key moves are especially in the draft: Chris Duarte, Isaiah Jackson, Sandra Mamulukavashi, right? These guys were great shooters and defenders, especially defenders to the Indiana Pacers. So they provide that great backup defense in case Miles Turner gets injured. TJ McConnell, this was a great signing by the Indiana Pacers to add another defensive guard, or more so secure him, right? Definitely one of the more sought out after guards in this free agency, as he is one of the best guards on defense, especially, with the amount of steals that he can give you. Torrey Craig was also a key addition to their team. He can definitely provide that defense in the paint and draw charges. We saw that a lot in the Bucks series in the finals last season. And they also signed Kiefer Sykes. As a result, though, they lost Doug McDermott and Aaron Holiday through the trade. But overall, I think the Indiana Pacers, they added some great defensive identity and some shooting, which will definitely help them go up in the rankings in the Eastern Conference this season.
For the Miami Heat, they definitely are one of the winners as well. Chicago in free agency. Obviously, they got Kyle Lowry in the signing trade for $85 million. Actually, it was updated. Before it was 90, but today it was confirmed it was $85 million to compensate for the Goran Dragic and Precious Achiuwa going back to Toronto, and that's a great signing for them. I'm a Toronto Raptors fan as well as Sparsh, so we both know how impactful Kyle Lowry is to any team. His leadership, his skill set is very valuable, and he was one of the main reasons why we won the championship. So Miami got a great player to go alongside Jimmy Butler, who got a max extension for $184 million. And Duncan Robinson, I did not expect him to sign with Miami, as he was demanding a lot of money prior to free agency, but they did get him for a fairly decent contract. He's one of the best shooters in the league, so that's great for the floor spacing. PJ Tucker, I did not expect him to leave Milwaukee after they won the championship, but again, he can space the floor, he could defend. That's a great piece for Miami to have. And they got some quality role players as well. They got Gabe Vincent, Dwayne Dedmon, Max Strus, Markieff Morris. They also re-signed Victor Oladipo for a 1 year minimum contract. Pretty decent. We'll see how he is this season if he's healthy, as he's currently injured. And they also signed Omar Yurtseven today. He's definitely playing well in the summer league. He had some monster games in the past week, so good signing for them. And Trevor Ariza walked to LA. Emmanuel Belisa walked to Golden State. Kendrick Nunn, he went to LA as well. The Lakers, by the way. And yeah, just overall, Miami had a great offseason, and we'll see how far they'll go in the playoffs.
Okay, so the Milwaukee Bucks, they haven't really made some significant moves to really improve their roster. I believe they actually got a bit worse, or probably stayed even at the end of this free agency. So let's just start with the draft. So they draft Georgios Kalasikas, drafted 60th overall. Bobby Portis was one of the more important signings of this free agency. Definitely one of the better role players in this NBA roster. 2-year extension, $9 million. Definitely could have been paid more, but this is a great signing for the Milwaukee Bucks. Definitely one of the better three-point shooters in this league as well. Semi Ojeleye, 1-year minimum. I don't really expect him to do too much in this Bucks roster. It'll probably be like a ninth man at most. Rodney Hood as well, 1 year. Don't really expect too much from him. But some other important signings. George Hill, 2-year, $8 million. He's definitely a great veteran backup point guard that the Bucks could have. So this is a great signing for them, and also for really low value too. Grayson Allen, they also acquired from a trade as well. Now, they had some pretty big losses to their roster. PJ Tucker was one of the best on-ball defenders in this league. And we saw a lot in the Brooklyn series where he was really putting that pressure defense onto Kevin Durant, forcing him to take lots of lower percentage shots and forcing him to really stretch out to the three and take shots in the left area where he's not really too great compared to the right. So, PJ Tucker, that's a really big loss to them, especially defensively. Bryn Forbes was one of the other surprising losses for Milwaukee. I did not expect him to just walk and go to San Antonio as well. He's also one of the best three-point shooters in the league, and the Bucks are a pretty good offensive team, especially from the three as well. He was really great, especially in like that first playoff series against the Heat. And to see him go like this, it is surprising. But I did hear some reports that he was looking out because he didn't really play at all in like the last 3 games in the finals. So maybe this is what he's looking for, some sort of bigger role, and I believe that's the reason why he left to go to San Antonio. And of course, they also lost Sam Merrill in the trade during this free agency process.
The New York Knicks had a pretty busy offseason. They obviously drafted Quentin Grimes, 25th overall. Pretty solid wing player. He can shoot. He can defend fairly well. And they also got J.R.E., who's a pretty decent player, and a few other players in the second round. They re-signed Derrick Rose. This is a good signing for them, as he was one of their best players in the playoffs in the Hawks series, as Julius Randle did struggle for most of the series, and Derrick Rose was one of the few players who actually stepped up and had some good performances. So that's a good player to have. Evan Fournier, for 4 years, $78 million. This could be seen as an overpayment. In my opinion, this is just fine for New York, as you've seen in the Olympics. Evan Fournier's been balling. He's playing good for France, and I think he'll be a good scoring option for New York. Alec Burks and Nerlens Noel both resigned for fairly good contracts. Burks is a good floor spacer. Also has some good games in the Atlanta series. And Nerlens Noel proved that he can be a good starting center in this league. He's a great defender, good shot blocker as well. Taj Gibson, fairly cheap deal. That's decent for their depth, and he's a good leader, so it's good for a locker room presence. And Kemba Walker signed after getting bought out by OKC. This, in my opinion, this will be a good signing for New York. He's obviously from the Bronx. He's from New York, so playing in front of his hometown is definitely special to him. And when healthy, Kemba Walker is a solid basketball player. But the past year or so, it's been kind of up and down, but I think he'll play really well in New York. And Julius Randle got resigned or got extended for $117. Obviously, their best player, they got to extend him. That's a great move by New York. But they did lose Reggie Bullock, who's a great shooter for them. He left for Dallas, and they waived Norval Pell, and Alfred Payton went to the Suns.
The Orlando Magic, they were also one of the more quiet teams during this free agency. They're not really the hottest market right now. A lot of their moves were a lot of their big moves, you could say, were more so in the draft, right? Jalen Suggs and Franz Wagner, both lottery picks. These are great players to build around. So Orlando's more into that rebuild phase, though they are kind of loaded in the guards. We might be expecting some sort of trade later in the future. Robin Lopez and Mo Wagner, these are great guys that can come off the bench. But as a result, they do lose Otto Porter Jr., which is a pretty big loss for them offensively. But then again, this aligns more with their goals to sort of rebuild around that younger player cast.
For the Philadelphia 76ers, they've had a up and down offseason so far. I'll start with the draft first. Jaden Springer, 28th overall. He's a very solid player, great defender. And Charles Bassey was a very underrated pick at 53rd overall. He is definitely going to be a good depth player for them in the future. Furkan Korkmaz, the shooter, he could definitely spread the floor for them nicely. And Andre Drummond, to be quite frank, I'm not an Andre Drummond fan. I don't really like his play style. I believe that he's more of a negative than a positive. But Dwight Howard did leave, so I guess they did need a backup center. And it's only a veteran's minimum, so it's not going to hurt them financially. But I don't see how he'll fit in this Philly system, as he can't really do anything except rebound. And he has a bit of an ego problems, but we'll see. Georges Niang, pretty decent role player. It's a pretty good contract as well. Danny Green got a 2-year extension for $20 million. A lot of people like to slander Danny Green, but he's a pretty decent shooter, and he's a solid defender. So I think it's overall a good signing for Philly. And as I mentioned, Dwight Howard went back to LA, and George Hill got waived, and Milwaukee picked him up. So overall, Philly did all right, and also Ben Simmons still hasn't been traded, which I believe he will, but we don't know. So their offseason could be a bit different if that trade comes.
The Toronto Raptors are definitely one of the more interesting teams of this free agency. A lot of their moves have been sticking to getting international players and also re-signing a lot of their players in their current roster as well. So some big moves, especially at the very beginning from last week, with that draft. Scotty Barnes, definitely one of the more controversial picks for the Toronto Raptors. But when you really take a look at it in retrospect, and you see that the Raptors are actually quite loaded at the guard position in terms of the amount of guards that they have, right? Scotty Barnes is definitely a better player in terms of the fit that they need. They need a more versatile forward type of player. And Scotty can be a backup point guard as well if they really need him to, but he's definitely better as a defensive forward. Delano Banton, also a Canadian native playing for the Raptors, and they also draft David Johnson right after. Some other big moves, re-signing Gary Trent Jr. He was one of the guys that the Toronto Raptors got from the Norman Powell trade. Gary Trent Jr. and Rodney Hood coming to Toronto. Of course, he was waived. But to secure him for 3-year extension, $54 million, this is a good signing for the Raptors. He's definitely one of those other defensive guards that you can pair with Freddie as the Raptors are sort of going into their more rebuilding kind of phase. And some other moves they make, Sam Decker, he was playing in Europe for a bit before he was in the NBA. 1 year, $1.8 million. He's definitely a great backup shooter off the bench. Khem Birch, 3-year extension, $20 million. Again, this is a good signing and a really good price. Khem Birch is averaging his career bests with the Toronto Raptors following his previous stint with the Orlando Magic. He's definitely that double-double guy, and he's a really athletic defensive center. So he definitely fits the Raptors sort of defensive mentality. And some other key players, Goran Dragic, they got from the sign and trade. Precious Achiuwa from the sign and trade as well. Precious Achiuwa, I really like this guy. He's really young. He's really great, gritty type of player. He's only 21 years old, so he could definitely be one of those guys that ends up staying on the Raptors. Goran Dragic, he's on the Raptors right now, but we don't know what his future will be like in the future. We're not sure if Masai will find that third team to do that trade with, or if he will end up being a trade asset in the trade deadline following next season. But regardless, he'll be a great mentor to the guards like Freddie and Malachi Flynn. And also another player they got, Ishmael Wainwright, 2 years minimum. He was also playing overseas as well. He's also one of those backup shooters that you can definitely have off the bench, right? This is a great addition to their bench, which is sort of lacking offensively last season. As a result, with all these signings, they had to lose quite a bit of players as well. Kyle Lowry was one of those main guys that they lost in the sign and trade. Rodney Hood was waived. Bembry was waived. Paul Watson was waived. And Aaron Baines was waived. I wasn't really too surprised about Rodney Hood and Aaron Baines being waived. Rodney Hood will start off with him mostly because he's also had that injury history, so we're not really sure if that would really fit with the Raptors. And Aaron Baines as well. It wasn't really likely that he would stay with the Raptors considering his performance of this season. Waiving those two definitely cleared up a lot of cap for the Raptors. And I was a bit more surprised when they waived Bembry and Paul Watson. These are definitely great hustle defenders. Paul Watson, he had a career high of 30 with the Raptors this season. I just felt like he didn't really get much playing time with Toronto, so it is sad to see him go. And Bembry as well. He's a great sort of hustle defender type of guy. Definitely can drive the ball into the post well and get a shot in that area. But I'm really happy to see Bembry to the Nets. This is a good move and pickup by them. And the biggest move that the Raptors make this offseason was, of course, re-signing Masai Ujiri and promoting him to vice chairman, president operations, where previously he was the president of the basketball operations. Masai has a really reputable history of being one of the best sort of front office guys in the league. He was actually a really popular candidate amongst many teams, including people like, teams like New York, etc. He was really sought after, and it's really great to see him stay because that provides assurance as the Raptors are sort of looking into this retooling phase and building around this young core, right? There might not be back in contention this year, considering the other teams that are in the East and the West, but they're definitely a team that is going to be more interesting to see later on in the next 3 to 4 years or so, maybe even sooner, right? Masai, he was really key into the 2019 run. Big trades that helped become a part of that process, right? Of course, we can start with the Kawhi Leonard trade, right? Bringing him and Marc Gasol in. Marc Gasol was, of course, acquired in the middle of the year, and that really helped add some defensive and offensive capabilities to this team. And he's also had a really big history of sort of making really beneficial trades to the Raptors that helped them acquire, non-lottery picks like Norman Powell, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam. Of course, you got the jersey there. So
I got rep OG,
He's great, man. He's great. OG, Siakam, Norman Powell, even Jakob Poeltl that ended up being used as a trade asset to get Kawhi and Danny Green, right? Masai has a really great consistency with drafting amazing talent, and I'm really happy for him staying in Toronto. This definitely provides some great reassurance to their future. So I'm really excited to see what they will be like later on.
Right, for the last team of the Eastern Conference, we got the Washington Wizards. Obviously, their biggest move was trading Russell Westbrook to the Lakers. And they got a fairly decent package. Obviously, they got some picks, but for the players, they got Kyle Kuzma. Personally, I think he might actually do well in Washington, considering that it's a smaller market. Because LA, I'm pretty sure everyone expects them to play well and have a high standard, but Kuzma did not live up to that hype when LeBron got there. So I think a change of scenery will do him well. He might actually play well alongside Bradley Beal and Spencer Dinwiddie, we'll come to later. KCP is a great shooter. Definitely helped their shooting woes from last season. Montrezl Harrell, he had a pretty above average season last year, but I think he could do well in Washington. Gives him more rebounding. He's undersized, but he's a pretty hustle player who can, just be that guy who just gives all the energy off the bench. And for their draft, they got Corey Kispert, the best shooter in the draft, hands down, 15th overall. And Isaiah Todd was a pretty solid player for them. Or will be a solid player. Spencer Dinwiddie was another of their biggest moves of the offseason. 3-year, $62 million signing trade with 5 teams. And they traded Chandler Hutchinson to, I believe, the Bulls, if I'm not mistaken. And Spencer Dinwiddie is a pretty solid player, just coming off that injury, but overall, I think he'll be fine with Bradley Beal and the supporting cast. And also got some more depth. They got Raul Neto to re-sign. Also, they traded for Aaron Holiday, and he's a really solid player. So they got some decent players, but they did lose Alex Len. He went to Sacramento. Walter Lopez went to Orlando. And Ish Smith went to Charlotte.
So that concludes our Eastern Conference reaction of this free agency. This is part 1 of our video. If you want to see part 2, make sure to click the link below. Don't forget to leave a like, leave a comment, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to also press the bell for push notifications. That way you're always up to date with what we are posting. And this also makes us more eager to post for you guys as well. It's always good for us to know that you guys are enjoying our content so that we can provide more for you guys, right? And don't forget to follow our socials as well. They will be provided in the outro. And to conclude this video, this is Sparsh, and I'm signing out. Make sure to take it easy and stay safe.
Thanks, guys, for watching. I'm Dorjee, and hopefully you guys have a good day.
Take it easy, guys.